Today we're going to cover the overall base network structure of links and connectors. So we're going to talk about the process for both creating and shaping links and connectors, as well as all of the attributes associated with both of these types. And as Johnson mentioned, this topic will be quite detailed. However, this will be very helpful when you're going to start building networks, and also if you ever are reviewing other colleague networks. So most transportation network models kind of use a simplified link and node structure where the nodes are used for any decision points. So these will include for any intersections and any merge and diverge areas. However, in microsimulation, this will require a lot more detail in the base network. So in this case, all of the major roadways will be modeled using links, which you can see here show up in a dark blue. And then any decision points are going to be used with connectors, and so those will show up as pink here. And the connectors are going to be used to model all the intersection turning movements and also any merge and diverge areas, really any place where you need to connect links, and as well as if there was any sort of lane additions or lane drop areas. Now today we're going to be using the default right-click behavior, and this will just be set automatically when you install Vissim 2021. However, you can also check this or update this if you want after the fact. So if you go to the Edit menu and then click on User Preferences, it will open up this window here. And within the GUI dropdown, there'll be a Network Editor section. And then here's where you can define that right-click behavior. So today we're going to be using that top option where right-click is going to open any of the context menus, and then Control plus a right-click is going to create any new objects. All right, so let's go ahead and start talking about the links in more detail. So whenever you go to add a network object, first you'll just want to make sure you have that object selected here in the Network Objects toolbar. So in this case, when we have links selected, you'll see it's kind of highlighted there in yellow. And again, that Network Objects toolbar will be on the left-hand side of Vissim when you open up that network editor. So you can add links in a couple of different ways. The first is through that context menu, which again, in this case, will be a right-click, and then you can select Add New Link. And this will just add a link of a default length and just kind of a straight link with no sort of curvature or anything. You can also add a link by holding Control and right-click at the same time. This will place your link start point. And then essentially while you have that kind of held in place, you'll just click and drag, and that will place a link of that desired length, and then you can release when you get to that link endpoint. And so this is particularly useful if you're trying to model a larger section of roadway. You can just use this to create that link with the proper length right from the beginning. And you can also add circular links within that context menu if you go to Add Circular Link. So if you have any roundabouts you need to be modeled, this will create that circular link for you with a connector all in place. And actually starting in version 2021, you can also put in a select diameter. So if you have a roundabout with a known diameter, you can actually just enter that in, and that will drop in that circular link for you automatically. And for the most part, a lot of links will need to have some sort of curvature. So you can, kind of like what we just talked about, you can add your link starting point, and with that Control right-click, and then you can hold that right-click button down, and you can continue to add any intermediate points with a consecutive left-click. And we'll go through all of this in more detail in a small example near the end. A lot of this will get kind of become second nature once you are starting to model and using the software. So there are a couple of different modes that are useful for both displaying and for doing network modeling. The first here is the regular mode, which is where you'll see the links with their display type. So you'll be able to see the links with their lane widths, and you can see even the lane markings. And then you can also switch to a wireframe mode. And what this mode will do is actually show you the link and connector center lines. So again, you'll see here all the links are going to be shown in blue, and then all of the connectors are shown in pink. And this is really useful when you're doing that detailed modeling, so you can kind of see where all of your connectors are located easily. And you can also see where those start and end points are for all of those objects. Within the network editor window, there's a wireframe button up at the top in that toolbar. So this is where you can turn that wireframe mode on and off. You can also do it on your keyboard by pressing Control-A. All right, so for the most part, a lot of the links are going to have some sort of curvature. And all of these links are made up of a few different kinds of points. So every link will have both a start point and an end point. And then at any points in between, those will be called the different polypoints. And so we can add these polypoints to add that curvature. And each one of these can be dropped in and then updated or adjusted as well. So in order to add these points, you can again do that in a couple of different ways. The first is either through that context menu. So if you right-click on the link itself, that will open up the context menu where you can choose to add a point at that specific location. And the other way is to actually just press Control, and then you can use the right-click button to just directly add in those points along that particular link. So most of the time, roadways are going to have some kind of curvature. And Vissim does have some built-in functionality where you can add in spline points automatically to both links and connectors to help create some of those smooth curves. So if you do have a curved section of roadway here, you can insert a link where you place the center line of that link along the tangent point to that curve radius. And then from here, there's a little shortcut. If you hold Alt and then left click and you select one of these tangent points here, you can then click and drag that into the other tangent segment. And what that will do is it will open up a window where you can generate a spline. And so this will allow you to create, again, those additional spline points within both of these segments. So this is just a way for you to further refine a portion of the link itself and just to create those spline points within each segment. So in this case, what will happen when that window pops up, you can enter in the number of points you want to create for each segment. So in this case, it would add an additional 3 points on this one tangent segment, and then again, another 3 points on that tangent segment and create a more smooth curve. And we're going to go through an example of this in action a little bit later. All right, and then you can also do a lot of this link shaping as well through the context menu. So if you right-click on a link, there's a section here kind of in the middle where you can generate a spline, and this will be for the entire link, so not for a particular section, but it'll be for the link as a whole. And you can also choose to recalculate that spline as well for the link as a whole. And then directly below that is some other features that are useful for doing network building. So this is where you can split a link. And essentially what that will do is it will allow you to basically cut that link in a particular point and create 2 individual links that are connected with a connector. And so this will be useful for any place where you have links where properties are going to be changing. So maybe you have a section of roadway where you have a lane addition or a lane drop. And so being able to split the link at a particular location is really useful for doing any sort of lane additions or dropping. You can also add the lanes directly within this menu as well. So you can add lanes either to the left side or to the right side. And you can also generate the opposite direction link automatically. So if you do have one section of roadway created and then you have kind of that mirrored section in the opposite direction, that will generate that for you automatically. And then if you ever need to switch the direction of a link, if you ever need to change that roadway, maybe for a future condition or something, you can click that invert direction button and that will kind of flip that entire link for you. Now, as all networks do have a lot of attributes associated with them, so and you can view these in a few different ways. The first is if you do select that link, and then in the lower left-hand corner is a quick view window. And so this will just show you a set of properties for that link, so you can just quickly see some information about that link. And you can always click on the wrench icon up here if you want to add in additional attributes and kind of add them to this list. So maybe if you wanted to see link length or any other sort of property, number of lanes, you can just quickly click on those links throughout the network, and all of that information will be displayed in the lower left-hand corner. You can also right-click on the network objects window up at the top. So if you right-click on links, and then you can select that show list option at the very top. And what this will do is open up a link list at the very bottom of the screen. And so this will contain a list of every single link in the network, as well as some of those major attributes here along the top in the column. And again, you can add any additional columns if you want to using that wrench icon within that window. And then finally, you can double click on any link, and that will just open that individual links window. And so this really contains all of the different attributes associated with a link that you can update or edit. All right, so let's go through kind of this window in more detail and just see what all of the different link attributes are. So at the very top, you'll have the link number, which will be generated automatically whenever you add a new link. You can also add in a name for that link, and you can also update the number of lanes. So in addition to using that context menu, you can also increase or decrease this number, or just type in another number of set number of lanes. And then over on the right-hand side, you can set the link behavior type. And this is really tied to that driving behavior of the vehicles that will be traveling on that particular link. You can also set the display type. So this will be how that link shows up within the network editor. So you can create as many different display types as you like. These can all be different colors, different textures, just depending on what you're modeling. And you can also set the level for the link. And so this can be really useful if you're modeling any sort of multi-story parking structure where you can set links to be on a particular level. All right, and then at the kind of bottom half of this section is a whole bunch of different tabs. So the first tab here is Lanes tab. And this is where you can set the width for any of the links. And the width of the links of the lanes will not impact any of the vehicle behavior, really. This will be more for visual display. So if you had maybe a separate pedestrian walkway, you could set those to be a smaller width, or you can always increase this if you have a little bit wider roadways. You can also set the behavior type per lane on a per lane basis within this section here. You can also choose any sort of vehicles that are blocked from using that particular lane. So for example, if you had maybe a bus only lane or a lane that did not allow any heavy trucks, you can set all of those blocked vehicles within this column. You can also further define the display type for the lanes individually. And then on the right-hand side is where you can set any of the allowed lane change options. So you can choose to not have vehicles make any left lane changes or right lane changes, or you can set those for only particular vehicle types in here. And then the second tab is if you were doing a meso model. So instead of a micro simulation, if you were doing a meso simulation, which that uses a simplified car following logic when you're doing that modeling. So this just contains some additional settings for that type of modeling. You can also set up links to be considered as a pedestrian area, which is going to be used for any of the VisWalk pedestrians. So this is where VisWalk models more detailed pedestrian behavior and interaction. You can also further refine the display settings. So if you did have maybe a bridge or overpass where you wanted to add some height to that particular link, so you can see that in 3D mode. This is where you can set the both start and the end Z offset. And you can also add thickness to the link within this section as well. And then at the very bottom is where you can choose different link visibility. So you can kind of set this on a per link level. So this would allow you to show vehicles moving on that particular link. You can also set whether you want the certain graphic parameters to be displayed on that particular link, or even if you want labels to be displayed on this link. So if, for example, maybe you want labels to display only for a couple of links within your network, you could uncheck this label box for all of the other links and then just leave this checked for the few links in your network where you do want those labels to appear. And then within the dynamic assignment tab, this is where you can set up any cost for that particular link or any additional surcharges. And then in the other section is where you can add in a gradient percentage, which will be taken into account if you are doing some kind of heavy truck modeling, which is going to use the acceleration and deceleration functions and kind of the power settings for that particular vehicle type. You can also set a lot of overtaking settings. So if you want to allow overtaking to occur on a particular link, this is where all of those settings are located. And then finally is the evaluation settings. So this is where you can choose whether you want certain evaluations to be set up for that particular link. All right, so then finally on the links themselves, if you ever need to get rid of a link in its entirety, you can again do that via the context menu. So if you right-click on the link and then go to delete, that will remove it from the network. Or you can also just left-click on the link itself and then use the delete button on your keyboard to remove that from the network. And then if you ever need to remove a polypoint or get rid of a group of them, you can either right-click on the point itself. So if you just hover on that particular point and right-click, you can then choose delete point from that context menu. Or alternatively, you can click on one of the points and then kind of drag it to another point, and that will actually delete all of the points in between that particular section. So if you need to get rid of a bunch of points quickly, this is a good method where you can just kind of click and drag, and all of those will be removed from that link. All right, so that kind of covers all of the attributes and functionality for links. So moving on to connectors. Now, connectors, again, are used to connect two links together, and these will mostly be used for any of your turning movements at an intersection, or again, any place where maybe your link is changing properties or changing the number of lanes. So any place where you have a merge section of roadway occurring or any kind of diverge. So the connectors, again, you can press Control and then right-click on a link endpoint. And you want to make sure you get kind of close to the endpoint of the link, but still on the link itself. And then you're going to just hold that and drag that to another link. And as soon as you have it on that link, you can release that mouse in order to add that connector. And when you're adding the connectors, you'll see as you click and drag, once it's attached to a link at both ends, it will turn into that pink color if you're in wireframe mode. And in the tooltip here, it will also show the word add connector rather than add link. So that's another good indicator that you're adding in a connector into your network. And it is important, especially for the turning movements at an intersection, to make sure that your connectors are kind of at the start at the end of a link and then end at the start of a link. So it's just important to kind of avoid as much overlap as possible, because as the vehicles are traveling, what they will do, say if the vehicle needed to take this connector and make this turn, as the vehicles are traveling, they're essentially going to keep moving on this link. And once they reach that connector start point, they will move from the link and then start traveling on the connector. And so they'll keep going on that connector until they reach the end point, and then at that point, they'll jump off and start traveling on the link itself. So just when you're modeling things, that's a good tip is just to keep these as close to the endpoints as possible. That way you won't have any kind of network objects that vehicles can miss. It just can help your overall network modeling. All right, so for the connectors, they also have different attributes associated with them. Again, you can get to these attributes the same way as links, so you can either view them through the quick view window, you can also see them within that link list again, and you can also double click on the connector itself just to see this connector window and see a list of all of the attributes. And a lot of these will be pretty similar to the links. So for example, the connectors also have a number that's going to be automatically generated. These typically start around 10,000, so you'll see all your connectors usually have a high number associated with them. You can also set the name for the connector, as well as that link behavior type and the display type. And then connectors are unique in that they do have a spline setting here that you can set. And so this will automatically add in those spline points to a connector, so you can create that nice curvature, especially for the turning movement. The connectors themselves also have a from link and to link section. So this will determine the different lanes that the connector will travel from and to. And it's always important that the same number of lanes are selected in both lists. So in this case, we've got 2 lanes that the connector can come from, and then 2 lanes that the connector is going to go to. And within Vissim, lane 1 is always going to be the rightmost lane. So it'll start counting from number 1 on the right, and then count from there. And then at the very bottom, again, is kind of that set of different tabs. So for the lanes, this is pretty similar to links. You can set the link behavior type. If you had any blocked vehicles that you didn't want to allow to travel over that connector or that particular lane. You can also change the display types for those lanes within the connector, as well as add in those different allowed lane change behavior if you don't want to allow vehicles to be able to change lanes within that connector. And then also unique to connectors is this lane change tab. And so this is very important for vehicles that need to take a connector as part of their route. So for example, maybe you have a vehicle that's going to take a northbound left and it needs to travel over that northbound left connector. These settings will come in to particular use for these cases. So the emergency stop position is the location upstream of the connector. So by default, it'll be set to about 16.4 feet. And so that means at 16.4 feet upstream of the connector, as the vehicle is traveling, if it can't make its left lane change and get into the appropriate lane, it will essentially stop at that point and wait until there's a sufficient gap in the left lane so that it can fully get over to continue on that lane for its route. So this is especially important if you're ever running your model and you notice vehicles are kind of stopping and waiting in order to make a lane change. That is really set using this emergency stop position. This is kind of the last point that a vehicle can travel to before it'll stop and wait in order to make that necessary lane change for its route. And so of course you can increase this if you kind of want vehicles to stop a bit further upstream as well. The lane change distance here is going to be used kind of as the point where vehicles will start to make their lane change decisions based on their routing decision. So again, if that vehicle is traveling and trying to take a northbound left connector, if it needs to make a single lane change, it's going to look at this fixed value. So it'll say, okay, I'm 656 feet upstream of the connector. I'm going to start looking for an opportunity to make my necessary lane change to get into that left lane and in order to get ready to make my left turn. You can also check this to apply per lane, and essentially that will just multiply this number by the number of lane changes that the vehicle needs to make. So if you have that checked and say the vehicle needs to make 3 lane changes to get into that left lane, it's going to start looking 3 times that upstream of that connector for its opportunities to start to position itself and get in the correct lane. So again, of course, you can update this. You can increase this if you want vehicles to be able to make their decision kind of more upstream and further in advance. So in your network, if vehicles kind of know like where they need to go ahead of time, you can always increase this so that they will position themselves early and just be in that appropriate lane. And then in addition to the fixed value that you can set, you can also set a distribution. And so this will allow you to set up a distance distribution that will allow that range to kind of vary at where those vehicles can start to make that lane change decision and start to realize, okay, I need to start moving over to make my necessary lane change. And then again, similar to links, there's also a meso section. Again, if you are doing any sort of meso simulation rather than micro simulation. You can also set the thickness for the connector within that display tab. And again, you can choose kind of the same options down here for that visibility if you needed to turn labels or vehicles on or off. And then within dynamic assignment, you can also add the cost to the connectors as well, and also any additional surcharges. And then on the right-hand side is where you can actually close a connector to a particular vehicle class so that those vehicles will not be able to travel on that connector at all. So this can be useful if you maybe had a small bus stop off to the side of the road and you didn't want any cars to take that particular connector to go to the bus stop. You can turn that off for cars and heavy vehicles and just allow the buses to take that section of roadway. And then again, within the Others tab, this is again where you can set any of the gradient percentages, any overtaking settings if that is allowed for this particular connector, as well as setting up the evaluations for this connector if you want those to be included in all of these different evaluation measures that can capture your metrics. All right, and then as far as the connectors go, they're very similar to links, so you can add points to them. You can, again, using the context menu, you can generate splines or recalculate those splines. You can use that same Alt and click functionality if you need to generate additional splines for certain sections of a connector as well. And you can do any sort of like point deletion or connector deletion in the same manner that we did for links. And so with that, I'm going to close out of this, and then I'm going to pull up a couple of different examples here. So the first one, I'm just going to kind of go through. We have a small, like, little activity lesson, which kind of goes through creating links and then creating connectors, and then kind of manipulating both the links and connectors together. And again, a lot of this will just become second nature once you start to build networks, and you won't really even think about too much about all of the different clicking and the holding of different buttons and things. It's really just at the beginning when you're getting familiar with the software and starting to build up the network where that will come into play. So again, for any type of link that you're going to add, you can of course go to the context menu by right-clicking, and then you can click Add New Link. And again, that will just drop in a very short 32-foot link for you without too much other editing. So from there, you can then, of course, move that link. You can click and drag those as well. And then the other option is if you hold Control and then if you right-click, this will allow you to automatically create a link of a certain length rather than just that default link. And if I do that again here for the second one, again, I'm going to switch to wireframe mode, which you can do up in the top of the network editor. So you can choose that toggle wireframe button to go to the centerline view so that you can kind of see where these other points are located. You can also do that with Control-A on your keyboard, and that will just quickly switch all of the links to the centerline wireframe mode. And then for any links, if you do want to add a point, probably the easiest way is if you hold Control and then you can just right-click on that link itself, and that will drop in a point for you. And so this is just a pretty quick, easy way where you can just quickly add in all of those different polypoints. You can also right-click on the link again, and then you can go to add point down here, and that will add those points. And then again, if you want to ever get rid of these, you can right-click on the point and hit delete point, or you can just click and drag, and wherever you go to, that will kind of get rid of all of the points in between. So again, I'm just going to press Control and right-click to drop in one of those polypoints here. And then once you have a point, you can just left-click, and then you can drag it to any other particular location within your network. All right, and then I'm going to, again, kind of do that same thing, just Control, right-click to create that link. And then I'm going to, again, select the link and then Control and right-click to add in those different polypoints. And so these polypoints can also act as an anchor. So you'll see in this case, C and E both kind of anchor the endpoints of this link. And then I can drag that middle section down here to create the start of this curvature. And so again, from here, once you kind of have that particular link created, you can then add in that curvature automatically within Vissim. So of course you can add in your different polypoints and kind of manipulate the link to get that desired curvature. But you can also use some of the built-in features to generate some of these spline points to get just a nice smooth curve. So again, if I hold Alt on my keyboard, you'll see a little like roadway icon that will get added to your mouse cursor. And so this will just let you know you're kind of in that spline generation mode. So if I click on one of these segments and then drag it to the other, you'll see here that in the tooltip, there'll be a little setting that will show you the from and to segment. And then it will also say convert section to spline. So this will just let you know that you are performing that functionality and going to convert both of these sections to have spline points. So if I release that, this window will appear, which will allow you to set the number of points between each segment. So I'm going to increase this a little bit just to get a smooth curve. And so essentially what that did is it added in 9 different points automatically in between kind of those main points along that segment. And so you can add as many of these spline points as you want. Again, you can also do it if you wanted to for the link as a whole within that context menu. But if you really only want it for a section where you kind of keep the endpoints intact, using that Control and Alt to just click and drag a section is probably the easiest way. All right, and then if I move over to creating those connectors, again, these will be created anytime you're needing to connect 2 links together. So if I, again, click on one of these links, and if I go near the endpoint, I'm just going to hold Control and then right-click and drag. And you'll see as soon as I hit that other link here, that connector is going to turn pink. And then you'll see in the tooltip there, it'll say Add Connector, whereas before it'll just say Add Link. So that's a good indicator that we've got a connector added into the network. And then that connector window will also pop up with the connector wording up at the top here. All right, and then once you do have your connector added, and if you notice a bit of overlap, like here you can kind of see that connector is not quite at the end, you can always click and drag these points, get them closer to the end of that link. And this is another place where that wireframe mode really comes in handy when you're trying to do a bit more detailed modeling and just kind of see exactly where that kind of connector and link overlap a little bit. And so this will just allow you to kind of position that connector near the end of those links. All right, and then similarly, I'll just grab that. Again, hold Control and right-click to click and drag from one link to another. And you'll see sometimes too, like if you get too close to the end, and then if you click and drag, you'll notice that the connector box will never show up because not quite on the end of the from link, so it still thinks you just want to add a link. If in that case, if that happens, you can always just cancel out of that window and then just come into the link a little bit more in order to add that connector. And then from here, you can again further refine the endpoints just to kind of get that connector placed near the end. And then for this connector, if you want to add in some of that curvature, you can set the number of spline points automatically up here. So anything from like 9 to 15 is usually produces a pretty nice curve, especially for like the turning movements within an intersection. You can, of course, add in, again, your points if you just hold and right click. And then if you ever want to recalculate this particular spline, you can right click on the connector and you can click recalculate spline here, and that will just kind of reposition that same number of points and just kind of smooth out that connector. All right, and then again, I'm just going to hold Control, right click and drag, and you'll actually see here both the links and connectors kind of save information from the last connector you created. So you can see that this connector actually already has some spline points included. You can always, again, update that and then right click to recalculate that spline to kind of smooth that out. And so if I do that again, for this one here, you can, again, always update the number of spline points, especially for some of the larger turns if you want those to just have a bit more curvature. All right, and then kind of moving on to links with multiple lanes. Again, I'll draw in a link by just holding Control and right click. And then you can add in the links, the lanes in a couple of ways. So you can right click on the link and just add it within that context menu. So that's where you can add a lane to the right side or to the left side. And then if you also double click on that link, within this link window, you can also add number of lanes. So you can just update that in here. You can update the number. And you'll see as soon as we add in any number of lanes or drop them, that will actually update the lanes tab automatically for you. And even within this lanes tab, if you right click in here, you can also add lanes to the left or right as well in here. All right, and then I'll draw in another link. Again, you can see it saves kind of that settings from the previous link that you just made. So I'll just make this a single lane at this time. And then in order to split the link, again, this is useful for any place where you maybe need to add lanes, like maybe this section we want to eventually add lanes or remove lanes from a section, or even if your link properties change, or if you needed to have like different display type or link behavior type setting. In that case, you'd want to split the link just to create a brand new one. So if I, again, right click on this part of the link here, this is where you can split the link. So if you go to split link here, that will bring up another window. And this will tell you the distance on the link where that split will occur. And that's just based on where you position that mouse pointer. And then we'll also give you information about the new link it's going to create. So essentially, it'll take this existing link, have link number 9 still be for this first section, and then it will create a new link for the other section. And then at the very bottom is where you can choose to have that connector be generated automatically. And so that will, again, create you 2 separate links, and then also drop in a connector for you in between. Okay, so let me just do that again. And again, I'll just right click and then go to split link here, and that will split that link. And then on the second section here is where you can add in that other lane. All right, and then kind of building off of this, you can maybe see where we're going here. We're just kind of going to create a little section where vehicles can kind of merge into each other. Let me put this down to 1 one link here. So then here's where you can, again, you can right-click and split the link at point C, and then I'll split the link again at point D. And then here in the middle is where you can add in that extra lane for this section of roadway. And then finally, kind of putting all of that together, this is where we can, again, split those links that we just did. And then we can add in that lane to the right. And then this is where if you have, this will be particularly useful for any freeway modeling where you've got some on-ramps occurring. This is where you can add in a connector to attach your main ramp section, in this case, right here, link 16. And then you can connect that to that freeway section where you have kind of that merge area where the vehicles will have some time to merge over into the leftmost lane before traveling and continuing on onto link 19. And so again, for these connectors, if you just want a bit more smoother spline, you can add in some of those points here, and that will kind of smooth that out for this section. So that's kind of, again, another brief overview of all of the different functionalities and how to add in those links and connectors within your model. And then finally, we also started creating a small test network here in Tallahassee, Florida. And so this way you can kind of see what the links and connectors look like in an actual model rather than just kind of in a test setting. So here's where we just have a small network built up. We've got a couple of intersections here and then also a divided roadway section. So if I zoom into one of these intersections here, if you press Control A, again, you can go to that wireframe mode. And this is where you can see again where all of those connectors are going to be used for all of those different turning movements within that intersection. You can model turn lanes in a couple of different ways. So you can either just create a link, a single link with that number of lanes. So in this case, we've got a left turn lane and then just your through lane here. So you can see here, this is just a single link that has the connectors going to both of these directions. And this will allow vehicles to kind of move into position along this entire link in order to use these connectors. The alternate method is actually if you split the link and just create a separate one for that turn bay. So in this case, you'll see this link here is completely separate from the main link. And what this will do is this will actually force vehicles as they're traveling, if they need to use this turn lane, what they will need to do is actually travel over this connector. So as the vehicles are traveling, they will have to get onto this connector and then continue on to this movement. So this will just kind of prevent vehicles from being able to change lanes like within this section, since those links are completely separate, and just kind of forces them to make their decision and to get into this lane, and to kind of allow them to queue up on this lane rather than maybe queuing up on this other link whenever they're trying to make a lane change at the last minute. All right, and then you can see also down here we've got another section where we kind of have that southbound turn merging into that eastbound turn. And so here's where we've got kind of our receiving lane set up. So in this case, again, we're just going to use a single link in this case for all three of those lanes. And this will allow vehicles to enter into this link and then they can change lanes over the entire course of this link in order to use the appropriate connector based on the particular route that vehicle has. All right, and then finally, we also have a small section of roadway here. Again, this is the divided roadway, so this is where we have a small little on-road that's going to connect into this divided roadway. So this is pretty similar to what we just did. Again, you can see we've got our main two-lane link here. So this is another great opportunity where you can use that split functionality to create this smaller 3-lane section in this part. And then from here is where you can create that kind of on-ramp section. And then you can have that connected with a small connector. And again, this will just allow vehicles time to merge over and to get into these left 2 lanes and then continue on their path. And then right above that, you can see we also have a little diverge area where we've got another kind of exit here for the vehicles. So in this case, we've got our connector here going into a single lane link, and then that eventually moves into a 2-lane link and then a 3-lane link. So you can kind of build up your roadway if you have kind of a section similar to this where it starts off as a single lane and then kind of gradually builds up. You can do that again by just creating separate links and then just having those small connectors in between to connect all of those together. So we'll probably keep using this model for the future sessions as well and just kind of building up off of this. But for now, that kind of covers our overview of links and connectors. Again, I know that was a lot of detail and a lot of clicking, but as you start to build your networks, a lot of this will become second nature and just become really easy for you whenever you are building your networks.